Hi, and thanks for joining us to learn how to increase revenues 10% by collecting your misplacement fees. This is the second webinar in a series on finding backdoor hires and collecting your misplacement fees. If you haven't already seen the first webinar we did on identifying your backdoor hires, you can go ahead and check that out. We have a recording available at feecatcher.com/staffingwebinars/identify backdoor hires on demand. So there's a URL right there. Go ahead and write that down for future reference, or I'll go ahead and email it to you after the webinar if you want to check that out. Just a reminder here, if you did see the first one, and maybe if you have not seen the first one, then just a little quick definition of what we're talking about here today. A backdoor hire is when you present a candidate to your client who then hires that candidate within your protection period and doesn't tell you. So we've actually found that 5 to 10% of your placed candidates are not identified, and that you're missing quite a few of these placement fees. Well, you can collect these placement fees for the entire duration of the statute of limitations. Your chances are best if you collect sooner rather than later. One of the stats we found is that 78% of fees identified within a year can be collected. Well, if you wait for the second year, only 50% of those fees end up being collected. So it's really important that you find and you act on your backdoor hires as quickly as possible to increase your chances of being paid for your hard-earned fees. So today we're going to talk about what you can do when it's time to collect. So we'll cover 3 different areas that staffing agencies need to focus on to make sure they can recover the funds that are owed to them. And those 3 areas are what you should do before you send the candidate, what you need to do after you send the candidate, and what your options are once you discover that you have a backdoor hire. So first we'll go ahead and talk about what you can do before you send that candidate out. Your best protection against the backdoor hire going unpaid is a signed copy from your client before sending any candidates at all. So about half the time you'll find the backdoor hire was actually an oversight, and that the client is more than happy to pay you once you bring it to their attention. This will often happen in larger companies in particular, where usually the left hand doesn't really know what the right hand is doing. So somebody made a hire, and the person in charge of actually letting you know and paying you just didn't quite know what was going on. They didn't know that they needed to pay you. So like I said, going ahead and letting them know that they've made a mistake is usually going to work about 50% of the time. What you'll find the other half of the time, though, is that the client didn't pay you intentionally. And this can really happen for a variety of reasons. So sometimes there was some sort of gray area, like the candidate was already in the database or submitted by another recruiter. Sometimes the client just doesn't think they owe you a fee in these cases. And it's also possible that they just thought they could get away without paying you. Your fees are hard-earned because you don't get paid for every little bit of work that you do. You actually just get paid when you place that candidate. So your fees are high. And sometimes the client just doesn't want to pay that when they don't really think it was worth that, or who really knows why. Maybe they just want to try and save that $25K. Most of the time what you'll find when they decide that they don't want to pay you, they'll say that it's because they never signed anything. So that's why it's really important to make sure that you always get your documentation together before you ever send out your candidate. This will prevent your clients from using that as an excuse for not paying you, and it also improves your chances of collecting from your clients before having to escalate. So sometimes you might have to go to a collections agency or an attorney, and having this documentation might be all you need to have to collect from your client without going through that process. However, in the event that you do need to escalate, you can make a case without documentation most of the time, although some states do have rulings that demand a signed agreement if you have a deal. So if you do have to escalate and you take one of these cases to court, if the defense attorney is aware of this ruling, then they can have your case thrown out. It's not always the case, like I said, just a couple of states here and there have that rule. So you want to make sure that you have your documentation together just because it can't hurt to have it, and that it includes specific wording to make sure you get paid if the candidate is hired in any capacity within 12 months of your last presentation. And that's important. You don't want to do it from your first presentation. You want to make sure it's from your last presentation. You also want to make sure that you get hired if the candidate is placed into a different role than what you submitted them for, if they are hired in a different department, or even if they're hired as a temp or consultant, because you did find that candidate for them. So you want to make sure that you're getting paid if they're placed in the company within any capacity. You may also want to include some language that states that the client will actually pay any attorney or collection fees that are incurred if the escalation is necessary. That just kind of helps protect you a little bit later on so you're not stuck with these extra fees. Once you've received the signed agreement and sent the candidate over, the next step after you send the candidate is to stay in touch with both your client and your candidate. So what you really want to accomplish here is you want to build relationships with both your clients and your candidates, which makes them more likely to let you know when a placement has been made. And it also makes it a little bit easier for you to approach either of them if you suspect a backdoor hire has taken place. So, imagine the client that you keep in regular touch with and, you find the backdoor hire did take place. It's a lot easier to say, oh, hey, how's it going? Just wanted to follow up on this. I saw that this happened. Love to congratulate you and see how everything's going. It's a lot less awkward when you actually have a built-in relationship with that client, and they're more likely to be a little bit more receptive to your communications at that point. So I'd recommend that you follow up with both your clients and your candidates at least once a month. You might want to ask your clients how their search went, if they're still looking, if they have any feedback for different candidates you could send over. And then you also want to ask your candidates what their job seeker status is, which is something that you really should be doing with all of your candidates anyway, just to make sure that you're not sending them to clients if they've just been placed somewhere else. So this also gives you the opportunity to find out from them if somebody that you found for the client has been placed with them. Another way to go about this, a little bit less direct way to stay in touch while still kind of keeping a relationship going, is to send some helpful information to your clients and your candidates. So you could send your clients maybe some tips on interviewing best practices, employee retention, anything that might be related to their industry that you might just find and think of them. You can also send your candidates information on, for example, following up after interviews, maximizing their LinkedIn profile and things like that. Just little helpful tips that help you stay top of mind so that, when a placement does happen, that they'll be able to reach out to you and just let you know. Or just so that when you find something, it's easier to reach out because you've already been in constant contact with them. So you can either do this manually, maybe set some reminders in your Outlook or your Gmail calendar just to remind yourself to follow up on a monthly basis. But you can also automate this with a system that'll send personalized emails to both your candidates and your clients at scheduled intervals, so it looks like you're following up on a one-on-one basis. And this ensures that it actually gets done. So, when you have like a systems process in place, it's a little bit easier to do than a manual send, especially if you have a lot of clients and candidates that you're trying to keep in touch with. Also during this time, after you've submitted your candidate, you want to make sure that you're tracking your candidates. And this can either also be manual or automatic depending on what tools you want to use and how you prefer to do this. If you choose to do it automatically, there are tools like FeeCatcher that are out there that you can automatically track your candidates without having to do any of the actual manual labor to see if they've been placed with your clients. Again, going with a solution that's systems dependent rather than people dependent will ensure that it actually gets done and that you can catch these placements as quickly as possible. If you wanted more information on tracking candidates, including checking out LinkedIn, doing Google searches, Don't forget to watch the recording from our last webinar on identifying backdoor hires, which again, I'll send out the link for that after this presentation. But once you've actually identified your backdoor hires, it's really crucial to act as quickly as possible for the best chances of collecting. So once you've discovered it, move quickly. Let's go ahead and collect it because, like we said earlier, 78% of fees identified within the first year can be collected. Well, that number goes down to 50% within the second year. So the sooner you can find and act on these hires, the better your chances of actually collecting on them. So as we mentioned before, half of your backdoor hires were the result of just a simple oversight. So what you want to make sure you do is you always want to give your client the benefit of the doubt. You don't want to damage any relationships you have here right off the bat. Just assume that they were the client that simply forgot to tell you, or that somehow down the line the message didn't get through to the person that was supposed to cut your check. So by giving them benefit of the doubt, you make sure that you're not damaging any client relationships. And even before you reach out, you probably just want to double check and be absolutely certain that your candidate actually works for the company that you place them at. So either confirm with the candidate, you can call the company and ask for the candidate by name and see if they answer. You can find a social profile where they mention they work there. Basically, just get some really hard proof that the candidate is working with your client before you do anything. And the next step you'll want to do is to pull your signed agreement and any other documentation you have, like maybe some emails where you sent the candidate, the emails where you scheduled the interviews, the emails where you followed up. Just gather everything you have and then create an invoice and reach out to your client to inform them of their oversight. So I might say something like in an email, hi, congrats on hiring so-and-so candidate. It looks like this one slipped through the cracks a little bit, but I just wanted to follow up on it because John was submitted in February, and it looks like you hired him in June, which falls within our 12-month contract period. So I've gone ahead and attached an invoice. It's due on this specific date. Thanks so much for your business. I look forward to helping you with more great candidates in the future. So keep it really positive and upbeat, and make sure you just kind of let them know that there was a little bit of an oversight and that you're aware of it and that you expect to be paid for your work. What you want to do is make sure that you set a reminder for the date that you asked payment to be made. You should probably keep this within a week or two of the initial outreach, and that way you can actually follow up the day after if the payment hasn't been made yet. So just reach out with a quick little reminder, ask them to overnight you the payment, and make sure that you say it's due within 1 business week. And this just kind of, again, gives your client the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they were just really busy and your email slipped through their cracks. Maybe they were on vacation and didn't have an out-of-office message up. Whatever the reason for it, just, again, give them the benefit of the doubt, but remind them firmly as soon as they've missed that payment date. So at this point, if you still haven't heard back, if you've sent the initial email, you sent the reminder email, and you still haven't heard anything from your client, it might be time to escalate. So a non-responsive client is probably avoiding you because they don't intend to pay you. So at this point, it's a really good idea to get either a collections agency or an attorney involved. You may also want to mention that you're going to do this in your reminder email to the client. This kind of urges them to step up and respond and cut you a check voluntarily. That way you don't have to go through all the hassle and the trouble of going to an agency or an attorney, because it can take more time, it costs you money, and obviously time is money. So, it's really just, it's better initially if you can get the client to cut you a check as quickly as possible. So if you just mention that you might be escalating it in your reminder, it might kind of give them a little kick in the butt to get moving and send you your check. They're probably even more likely to respond if you, in your original agreement, said that they will have to pay your collections and attorney fees. Because, again, they don't really want to have to pay you more than they already owe, especially if they're considering not paying you for what they owe currently. If your client does respond, but they say, I'm not going to pay you, that's another opportunity to contact your collections agency or attorney. At this point, if they're coming up with an excuse, it means that they're just trying to get out of what they owe you, and they're looking for ways to do it. So if they ask you to send you any kind of documentation you have, any emails you have, the signed agreement you have, don't do it. What they're trying to do here is they're looking for loopholes that will support their argument against paying you. So again, this is a really good opportunity to escalate the situation to a collections agency or attorney. Last case scenario here is likewise if their attorney calls you asking for more information, you want to get in touch with your own collections agency or attorney. Because what you'll see here is that sometimes your collections agency or attorney has dealt with these very similar situations before. So they should actually be able to come up with some counter arguments ahead of time for any loopholes that the defense attorney might be looking for. So this is really a good spot where the expertise of somebody that's dealt with these situations quite a bit could really come in handy and help you collect your money sooner rather than later. So now I just want to do a couple what not to do before we end the webinar. The first thing that you never want to do, no matter what, is do not forward your documentation to the client's attorney. So like we said just a couple seconds ago, if the client's attorney reaches out to you, that's a really good point to get your own attorney or collections agency involved, because if the client's attorney is asking for your documentation, they're just trying to build a defense against you. So you really want somebody that can come in and see those potential loopholes that the defense attorney will find, and then preempt them with counter arguments and past rulings for similar cases, so that when they send the documentation, they kind of frame it in such a way that the defense attorney can't really come back with anything. The next thing that you don't want to do, you don't want to discount your fee. For a good client that doesn't have any history of backdoor hires and has a valid reason for not paying you, maybe they just misjudged their budget, for example, you may want to offer to work with them and ask what sounds good to them. Again, this is really for a good client. The goal is to get them to voluntarily cut you a check without having to involve any of your collections agencies or attorneys, because those take a little bit more time to get the money into your bank. So if they come back to you and they suggest paying you maybe $20,000 for what was supposed to be a $25,000 fee, you should just go ahead and take that and salvage the relationship and get that money into your account sooner rather than later without having to turn it into a big mess. That's not if you salvage the relationship as well. However, if they do lowball you, you need to tell them no and inform them that you're going to send them to collections if your fee is not paid on time. If you end up coming up with a number on your own, if you discount your fee on your own without asking the client what they think, they can always come back and say no, which puts you in a worse position than before, because now they think that's kind of like a starting point to negotiate lower. So the second you discount your fee, they think that they can kind of negotiate you and get you much, much lower than that. But the reality is that you're going to be sending them to collections or an attorney so you can get that full fee from them. The number you come up with if you do discount your fee would not be legally binding in any way, but it can reduce the chances that they'll voluntarily cut you a check for what they owe you, which is counter to what you actually want to do. The last thing not to do is you should never call the candidate to try and place them with another company. Some recruiters might feel like they've been slighted, and their initial reaction might be to call the candidate and say, hey, just wanted to let you know you're dealing with a really dishonest employer. I worked really hard to get you your fee. and they completely just hired you without letting you know, and kind of bad-mouthing that client to your candidate and trying to get them to move to another candidate, or I'm sorry, to another client, so that maybe you could collect a fee from that placement, is a really bad idea because you can actually get countersued by the client. Again, it can get really messy. So you just want to make sure that you don't try and place that candidate somewhere else. Try not to badmouth them, or try not to badmouth the client to the candidate, and just try and, be above the entire situation. It can be a little bit hard to do, but it's important to keep your head high and take the high road. So that's it for today's presentation. We hope you learned a thing or two about how to approach a missed placement fee, in terms of, first of all, how to find it, how to approach your client, when it's time to escalate, and what you shouldn't do. If you need any help identifying your missed placement opportunities, we'd like to invite you to search your past candidate submissions for backdoor hires, and that'll let you get your first 3 leads for free. With the average fee around $25,000, you could find up to $75,000 in revenues from this free trial that you've actually already produced and didn't even know that you had coming to you. So you can see what you can find by going to feecatcher.com/free trial and requesting your 3 free leads. Thanks so much for joining us today, and we hope you'll be in touch with us soon. If you have any questions in the meantime, don't hesitate to reach out to John Guidi. He's the CEO of FeeCatcher, and you can reach him at john@feecatcher.com. Thanks, and have a good one. Hope to see you next time.